poem that he wants to read here tonight. I also want to bring over. Do we have her? Come over here, guys. I want to bring over. This is Courtney Ross. Courtney, hold on. I'm going to put the mic up while she's speaking. This is George Floyd's girl.
My soulmate. He is someone I will be with during life and after death.
Miss Ross?
I love him. He is a man with a big heart, like everyone is saying in the courtroom. Okay, baby.
Miss Ross?
And sorry, it's hard when someone. I'm not used to it.
Miss Ross.
That's important. I would just let you
Courtney?
Floyd was nothing but fun.
Yeah, she's grieving right now.
He was funny and silly
You're welcome to
and prayerful and a man of God. And he was out of this world. And I like to tell people a lot, like, Floyd was a big man. And he was too big for this earth. And I see it now. I see that he's over all of us right now. And
we got Chauvin. We got Chauvin.
Miss Ross, will a guilty verdict on all three counts bring any solace to you?
I can't say. I just can't say.
What would George think about all of this? What he created?
I've always called him Floyd. So George is always kind of like, who is that? Like, man, George. I don't know who that man is. I can date him. No, I'm just kidding. What I know Floyd would want out of all of this is that people would be coming together. All people would be coming together. This isn't a time to separate. This isn't a time for us to blame or hurt each other. It's a time for us to come together. I know this verdict is coming back guilty. And when it does, I hope that his heart will really come through in everybody and know that he is such a loving man and would want us all to just, like Tashira said earlier, put our arms around each other and just love each other today.
And what will guilty verdicts mean to Minneapolis? What will it mean to Minnesota?
I think it'll mean change. It'll mean change. It's a first step in a long road to recovery. We have a lot of work to do in Minneapolis, but I believe Floyd came here for a reason. This is a sacred, sacred land, and we need to start respecting that again. And I know that that is what he would want. Floyd was attached to this city. He was attached to the lakes, particularly Lake Budemakaska. And I know that it happened here for a reason. Maybe we are the epicenter for change. Maybe we're making the world look at things in a different way. I'm not sure, but I know it definitely started that momentum.
And why so important to be standing in this physical space right now?
I think so many of us have
Hi, everybody. We are just awaiting a verdict in the for Derek Chauvin, the ex-Minneapolis Police Department officer who's charged with the murder of George Floyd. That's going to come any moment now. And we're going to tune into some live coverage of it now.
See all the people, and he kept mentioning, I see
The
all
jury deliberated for
their support,
a few
whether
hours.
it be in the streets or in the halls of Congress. I see all of the people who have stood up for justice and stood up for his brother and against what happened to his brother. So right now he is inside of the court waiting on the verdict, just like all of us. Jake?
Although it does sound, though, Sarah, like Philonise Floyd, George Floyd's brother, like George Floyd's girlfriend, Courtney Ross, is optimistic that it will be a guilty verdict based on what you're saying.
Absolutely. And you know, the reason for that, one, is he has said this over and over to me long before the jury said they had a decision. He has said that he has faith and he believes that no one could have watched that video, the video alone, and not come back with a guilty verdict. He also realized after we talked and I told him that a verdict had been reached, he said, there were no questions, and he noticed there were no questions by the jurors in this case, and to him that was a sign that they had looked at all of the evidence in the trial, and that they didn't need to rewatch it again and relook at it all again because they hadn't made a decision. And he believes that decision will be guilty. But again, we have to be very careful. It is the 12 people, the 12 jurors that were chosen that makes that decision, and we're going to hear that decision very shortly.
All right, Sarah Seidner, thanks so much. We'll come back to you in a moment. Let's go now to a different part of Minneapolis. Adrian Broadus is in a different part, I think downtown, near a police precinct. Tell us what's happening where you are.
Hey there, Jake. We're about a half mile from the Hennepin County Government Center. If you look behind me, you'll notice a crew with the city is installing more concrete barriers just in front of the roadway that leads to the police department. On the other side of that truck, there's a gate. That gate wasn't there earlier today. It was delivered and installed moments before we learned jurors had reached a verdict. On the other side of the police department, the businesses here, Lola Red, have put up more boards to protect their building. When this verdict humanity. He talked about the people he served for nearly 40 years on that corner. Like Floyd, he moved to Minneapolis from Texas. And like other people in that community, he had issues with members of law enforcement at a young age. He said he had an encounter with police that left him with a traumatic brain injury. And he wants to use that experience, once we hear the verdict, to move forward, to help people heal. He said, you know, yesterday when we heard the closing arguments, the defense said Floyd had an enlarged heart. The prosecution said Chauvin's heart wasn't big enough. He said heart is at the center of this, and he leads with love. Downtown, around all of the barriers and barricades, there's a big billboard. It's black, and in white letters, there's the word love. And that's what he wants to lead with, love. Jake?
Adrian Broadus, thanks so much. I want to go back to CNN's Don Lemon. And Don, one of the most remarkable things about this trial and about the George Floyd case, and I don't know if my team has those murals, the pictures of those murals ready, but there have been pictures, paintings, murals of George Floyd around the world, in Pakistan, in England, all over, as a symbol of injustice at the hands of the government. This case has taken on a truly international meaning, representing the idea of people who do not deserve it being put down, being killed, being oppressed by their governments, often because of racism, but also just in general, government versus people.
Yeah, and it all started in Minneapolis in what is now George Floyd Square. There was no George Floyd Square there, obviously, before this happened. But it has also transformed in many ways to a Black Lives Matter way, which is in D.C., where you live, Jake. But I think the reason it's become such a symbol is obviously because, number one, I really do think that it's because of the attention that this particular case got because we were in quarantine. And because people didn't know where their lives were going, what was going to happen next, because we didn't know if our loved ones were going to be sick, and or if we were going to be sick, or what was going to happen from moment to moment, if we were going to have a job or so on. We have to remember where we were a year ago, and not very far, along in a year from now, a couple months, at May 25th, we're basically sort of in the same place. So we were all sitting at home in quarantine. And I think the whole world was watching because because the world looks to America as a symbol of democracy. And if there's any place on earth that can guarantee freedom and that can guarantee what the Constitution says, that we are in search of a more perfect union, there's no other place on earth than the United States. And to see this atrocity happen on a city street in the middle of the day in the United States was just something that people could not wrap their heads around it worldwide. People in America couldn't as well. For people of color particularly, it was a confirmation of all those things that people say, well, maybe it's an exaggeration and what have you, but it was confirmation. I think for many people around the world, it was just they were just stunned, and they couldn't believe something like that was happening in the United States and not in some war zone or some third world country.
So just to take a step back, the Black Lives Matter movement, as I recall first hearing about it, was in 2015 after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And if we go back, not even 6 full years, and I don't mean to pick on Hillary Clinton, but Hillary Clinton, who certainly is somebody who is allied with civil rights, first asked about this, did not know what Black Lives Matter meant, made the same mistake that a lot of politicians did at that time, saying, oh, well, all lives matter. Now we're at a point, almost 6 years later, after all of these different cases, and maybe crescendoing with the death of George Floyd, that because of the pandemic, as you note, but also because of how horrifying this video was, this 9 minutes and 29 seconds of a police officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, while children begged the policeman to get off his neck, and he didn't. To the point that you have Mitt Romney marching with the Black Lives Matter movement in Washington, D.C. in 2020. It is a sea change in the culture, a sea change. Do you agree?
Well, I think it's a sea change in awareness, not necessarily in practice. And so we will see what happens with this verdict. But it was not just Black Lives Matter, right? And because many people didn't see, and it's so easy to see if you just added the word to, T-O-O at the end, or also, Black Lives Matter also, or Black Lives Matter too. And then I think it helps people understand what you mean by that. Not that all lives, don't matter,
right?
But Black Lives Matter because that's what we're talking about.
Right.
At this point, it's obvious that other lives, that it's obvious that white lives matter. But it wasn't just Black Lives Matter. Remember, it was Colin Kaepernick who took a knee for injustice, police injustice, and for reform in this country. And then you had Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck. At first, what we thought for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And now when the trial started, we learned that it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds.
Right.
And so there have been a number of things that have led us to this. Remember, there was very fine people on both sides. And people said, okay, this is nuts. Then there was Ahmaud Arbery. And we can't forget how horrific that video is. Horrific what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. But how horrific the video is of Ahmaud Arbery jogging down a street and then being shot with a shotgun. And we see it.
Yeah.
And then we hear what happens to Breonna Taylor in her bedroom, and then the death of George Floyd. So there have been a number of things that have led to this, but yes, a sea change in awareness. We'll see if it's in practice when this verdict is read.
Don, we'll come back to you in a sec. CNN's Omar Jimenez is at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis at the site of this alleged crime. Omar, what's it like there?
Jake, well, a crowd has started to grow here, of course, in anticipation of a verdict, as you hear people start to chant as well. But when you make your way over to the spot where George Floyd took some of his final breaths, you see that, of course, the memorial aspect of this is still here. But then when you pan up and look over to the left, you see how many people have started to form. Some of them, of course, press here in this moment. But people are anxious. They want the results in this trial. They want the verdict. One woman we spoke to, who actually seems to be leading some of the chants right now, said that it doesn't matter to her what the verdict is. She feels that the momentum that has grown from the movement over the course of a little under a year now is enough to propel people forward for generations to come. And when you look over here, these are people, they're leading the chants. We're not aware that there's any television or something set up for them to watch to see actually when the verdict drops, but you see the passion is still here. They are leading. They want to prosecute the police. And one person we spoke to actually earlier today said that's what they do here in Minneapolis. There was never a question. They wanted the police, I should say, to be treated how any other person would be treated if they had done the actions that Derek Chauvin had done. And so that's what people are feeling here. And when you think about this moment that we're in, this moment that has been coming for almost a year now, that has been building up, this is why it's important. This reminds you of the somberness and the reality of the situation, that a human life was lost at the hands of police, that a family still has a gaping hole. The only question is with this verdict, does this now become a spark point for even further to come out of here in Minneapolis, Jay?
All right, Omar Jimenez, and it's all in the hands of the jury right now. We're expecting them to come and to the courtroom, to the government center, and announce their unanimous decision after only 10 hours. We're all riveted, waiting to hear what they have to say. We understand that President Biden at the White House is at his TV, watching, waiting to find out what the verdict will be. Let's bring in Anderson Cooper and his panel. Anderson?
Jake, thank you very much. Appreciate it. When the jury does come, and we're not sure if they've been, do you believe that they've been sequestered at the hotel and that's where they came up with the verdict?
We believe so. That's where they have been sequestered for the evenings at a hotel. They could come and talk to their families and communicate. But they were deliberating very late last night. And the assumption is that they are being transported to the courthouse during some part of this. Remember, you were able to hand over notes through Zoom because they didn't want to have to bring the defendant, the counsel, everyone in. The jury never goes in the room to actually hand over the question to the judge. It's always sort of done in this distance way to give them their
So what's going to happen once they are brought back, whether they're there now or not, when they actually are back in the courtroom, what happens?
They're going to sit in the jury box the way they have been through the entire trial. The foreman will hand the jury verdict to the judge, who will then review it quickly, ask if they've all been able to lead to a unanimous verdict, which has to happen, in Minnesota. It must be unanimous.
At this stage, does the judge already know what the verdict is?
Yeah, usually the judge gets a look in advance. He knows what's coming. He will ask the foreperson of the jury, count one, how do you find? Guilty or not guilty? The foreperson will read the verdict. We'll do that times 3. And then the next big thing that happens, if there is a conviction, the prosecution often seeks to remand the defendant, to send him into jail. Derek Chauvin has been out on bail pending trial. What changes if there's a conviction is that presumption of innocence is now gone. So it's common. It's up to the prosecutor if you want to ask this, and the judge doesn't always agree. But I've had cases like this where someone's out on bail, get convicted. You say, Judge, we now move to remand the defendant. And often, not always, often the judge says, I grant that motion, and he's off to prison.
So there's an option there. He might be able to go home, or he might actually directly go to prison.
Well, sometimes it's called step back oftentimes, right? And they could be able to do it because this is a murder conviction. It's not one that's a non-violent crime. Sometimes judges will give the luxury of being able to settle one's affairs before being brought in. But of course, Derek Chauvin, if he is convicted of murder bigger charges, one or more, or any of them, then there is a presumption that he is no longer able to have the benefit of freedom. But again, this is not a sentencing opportunity yet. This will be the conviction or acquittal moment. The judge will still have to determine, often through a report, there'll be discussions about remorse, etc. He'll fill out some paperwork. We'll talk to the equivalent of a probation officer about his views on the crime and what he has done to sort of guide the opportunity in the judge's hand to say, what am I dealing with? What type of criminal or felon am I dealing with now? Am I talking about somebody who's likely to be a recidivist, meaning they'll return to a life of crime, somebody who needs treatment in other ways? All this holistic sentencing will take place before the actual time the judge says, here is the number of anything. We in America have changed this over the course of time to say it's not just a pipeline to prison post-conviction, it's about how we can rehabilitate offenders as well.
Van Jones, obviously people are listening very closely to, is it going to be conviction on all counts? Will it be? How much does that matter in terms of the public's response?
I think it matters a lot. I think, obviously if there's an acquittal, it's completely devastating. But if it's just the lower one, he's negligent, that didn't feel negligent. That didn't look like negligence. And so I do think that it matters. If it's all three, I think you're going to feel a level of vindication for this movement and for this community. And don't forget, this is not the only case in that area. I've talked to people on the ground there. What you have to understand about this, where this is happening, it's the most livable place, and it also has the biggest disparities. In other words, it's a great place to be white, and it's a terrible place to be black. That's what everybody tells me. And they say the level of friction between the Hmong community there, the Somali community there, the black community there, and the police is unreal. They say they feel like they're in a war zone all the time. Then you bring in all these troops. You have a grieving community that's already traumatized, and now you have police and troops everywhere. So they are literally just on pins and needles. If you have a complete vindication of what all these grassroots groups have been saying, then there's relief. But if you come back with just one charge, and then if the sentencing guidelines give you, a couple of years, it's going to be putting salt in a very big wound.
Chief Ramsey, we have several hours now or time where we are awaiting this verdict. Law enforcement also has time to try to figure out, obviously they have been going over contingency plans for quite some time.
Well, they have been going over plans. I mean, you have to be prepared whether there's an acquittal or whether there's a conviction, because you're going to have in many cities people take to the streets, either in celebration or because they're upset because of the verdict. You have to be ready no matter what. Unfortunately, they have some experience because in May, with the killing of George Floyd, there was a lot of unrest. And so many of the areas where you had unrest, you're going to already have your platoons out there to be able to protect strip malls and different places like that where you're likely to have some issues. And you want to be able to have people just celebrate and express their First Amendment rights at the same time. So you got to have that balance there. And I think right now that's what's been taking place. There's been a lot of preparation. There's been a lot of conference calls between major city chiefs, conference of mayors, IACP and PERF, talking about the things that went bad in May, so we don't repeat the same mistakes in May, and that's important.
But you also do have on the other side of it, you've got to try to have some public order and some safety, but you also had 50 grassroots organizations begging, saying you have now too much police presence on us. You got these Humvees, you have all this stuff, and the young people feel that they are being pushed up against the wall. They need the space to grieve. They need the space to celebrate, and they need the space to be able to do it the right way. And so sometimes, you're in a tough situation if you're in local government there, because if you don't have enough presence, you're going to get in trouble, but you can also overdo it. And so what my hope is that you have, let me just give some praise to some of these groups. Black Visions Collective, Reclaim the Block, Minnesota Youth Collective, Take Action Minnesota, ACER, Movement Voter Project. Those young people have been out there when the cameras were there and when they weren't, keeping this movement going. They need space to protest tonight safely or to celebrate tonight safely. I hope they get it.
What's concerning, though, is we have a Pavlovian response in America that when we have impending verdicts and you see buildings start to be boarded up and businesses start to close, that trust gap that's already there between our justice system and members of the community, it expands exponentially. Because in their minds, they say, you're preparing me for an acquittal. You are telling me if it's boarded up, you anticipate my unrest, my wrath. You anticipate the devolution of a protest into looting and other things. And so part of what you're seeing in terms of the unease you're speaking about, Van, is that Pavlovian reflex in response to say, what does this mean if you are calling out the National Guard? People believe, did you get a heads up, Governor? Did you get a heads up, Mr. President? Did you give a heads up, Judge? Do you know something that we do not know? And finally, on the point that you raised, Van, about the difference between how people will compare and what negligence looks like, Minnesota has a very specific and recent memory of what second-degree charges look like, second-degree manslaughter, because Geronimo Jimenez, who killed Philando Castile, charged and acquitted with the second-degree manslaughter charge. Does that feel the same way for George Floyd to people? You have the officer, now resigned, Kim Potter, who killed Dante Wright. Same charge. Does that feel the same way of that 9 minutes and 29 seconds? And so you've got a population of people, human beings, who are saying, well, if I'm going to compare, this doesn't feel like those cases. And if that's all he gets, this is going to be something that might contribute to that trust gap widening.
Let's go
Anderson,
back to
real quick, if I can just respond to something Van said. One of the things that was discussed is not having a heavy-handed approach immediately. If you need to have people in riot gear and so forth, have them out of sight. Stage them someplace out of sight. They can respond quickly, but you start off as low a level as you can.
Let's go back to Jake.
Thank you, Anderson. We are standing by for the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial to be announced any minute. I'm going to hand it over to CNN's Wolf Blitzer right now. Wolf?
Jake, thanks very much. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're picking up our special coverage of the Chauvin trial verdict. Expected momentarily. Joining us are Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon. I want to go to Sarah Seidner first. She's on the scene for us in Minneapolis. She's right at the courthouse where we expect this verdict fairly soon, right, Sarah? Looks like we have to reconnect with Sarah Seidner. We're going to try and reconnect with her momentarily. We're also watching all of this unfold with Don Lemon and Anderson Cooper. Let me bring in Don Lemon right now. Don, you got some thoughts on what we can anticipate?
I do have some thoughts, Wolf, and just so you know, I've been in communication with Ben Crump, the family attorney, and I asked him, I said,
He was with you. What's the mood? Where are you? And he said, Philonise and I are in the courthouse. He said, the family has faith that Derek Chauvin will be found criminally liable for killing George Floyd. And again, that's from Ben Crump, the family attorney. And as has been reported earlier, that Philonise Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, is going to be in the courtroom when the verdict is read, and he is there now with the family attorney. And the family, I would imagine, it together, and they are cautiously optimistic that considering the time that it took the jury to deliberate, Wolf, and come up with a verdict that is going to be at least in their favor. Not exactly sure how they're going to rule on all the charges, but there you go. That is the latest from the family and the attorney, Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah, we're going to be checking back with them all the time. Sarah Seidner, we just managed to reconnect with you, Sarah. First of all, tell us where you are and tell us what you're seeing.
All right, so we are right across the street from the Hennepin County Government Center where the court is. We know that George Floyd's brother, Philonise Floyd, is inside of the court. We know that we have our reporter inside of the court as well, Josh Campbell. He is there to listen to the jury read the verdict. We are awaiting. We know that Derek Chauvin is inside the court as well. Chauvin went in about 8 minutes past 3 local time, so 4:08 your time. And so everyone is waiting for the jury to come in, and everyone is waiting to hear from the foreperson as to what their decision is. I'll give you an idea of where we're standing. If you look to my right, there is the train and the edge of where everything is blocked off around the courthouse. If you look at the little gate that's there, that's where a lot of folks have been brought into the court, in and out of the court in cars. And then if you look to my left, you will see a little grassy knoll there. And just beyond that, there are dozens of people that have gathered, some of whom knew George Floyd well, and who are here to speak their piece. And we do know that the family will be speaking within an hour after the verdict is read. We also know that we heard from Philonise Floyd just before he went into court. He said he was pacing, that he has been patient, but he was pacing right before he went in. He said, look, I am hoping that this verdict helps me finally get some sleep. because since May 25th, 2020, he hasn't really been able to sleep well at night. It has been extremely difficult for this family. It has been extremely difficult for this community. Whether you are a resident here, a business owner here, an official here, there have been a lot of very emotional folks around, and those emotions are at their height at this moment. There are folks that are already in tears. There are folks that are worried about what this jury is going to do. And so you also have another case not too far from here, a few miles from here, where another black man unarmed was shot and killed by police in Brooklyn Center. And so the combination of all that makes for a very, very tense scene. And it is why, and I'll give you a look, the media is, of course, here from around the world. This building is the Star Tribune building, which is one of the newspapers here, the newspaper here. And you can see it's boarded up as well as almost every single other building downtown here and around other parts of the city as well, including near George Floyd Square, where dozens of people have already gathered there too. Wolf.
We're going to stay in very close touch with you, Sarah. I want to bring in Omar Jimenez. He's also on the scene for us. Omar, tell us where you are and what you're seeing.
Right now, Wolf, we are at George Floyd Square. This is ground zero for where George Floyd's final moment is like.
All right, hold on, Omar. This is the judge, the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill.
All rise for the jury. All right, please be seated. Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now, we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
Move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further? All right. Thank you.
And there you have it. Justice for George Floyd. 11 months. Guilty on all three counts. George Floyd has justice today. Derek Chauvin found guilty on all three counts. Has been remanded into custody. And today there's justice. And justice for George Floyd and justice across the United States. Just a very welcome news, and a sigh of relief across the United States today for people who've been watching this. George Floyd, who was killed by former Minneapolis Police Department officer Derek Chauvin, May 25th of last year. Nearly 11 months later, found guilty on all three charges, has been remanded into custody. I appreciate you guys tuning into this special edition. I apologize for my emotion. Just very, very, very good news. So, hey, if you want to catch the AM report at our normal time, we're live every weekday morning. Check us out at haps.tv/@Alex. I appreciate you guys chiming in and having a sense of community with one another during this moment, and being there for one another and holding space for each other and taking care of each other. And thank you guys. And we will see